Since one good turn deserves another, I am enclosing $1 for the poor of the world for which you are caring. Any other men have wives that sleep? Reminds me of the man that I heard about. He hadn't spoken to his wife in 15 days. He didn't want to interrupt her. Would you like to hear something about psychiatry and psychology tonight? If so, let us start with first the normal. Briefly, the normal. Every human being has a vital principle inside of him which manifests itself in terms of urges, impulses, passions. Sometimes these have been called concupiscences. There are three of them, principally. One, there is self-perfection of the human mind. If we did not have that drive within us, we would never seek to perfect ourselves intellectually or socially. Now we have another drive, because man not only has a mind or a head, he's got a body. You see, in 5 years, 6 years, I haven't learned to draw any better. So there's another impulse which is directed to the body and its pleasures, and particularly this, just as this is self-perfection of the mind, so this is self-perpetuation of the human species. Now, in addition to these two urges that we have, one of mind and body, we also have an urge to that which is outside of us, namely the world. For example, well, the ownership of property. Have an urge to own things. For example, like an automobile. You know, listen. If there are any automobile designers working, I hope sometimes they give as much room in the future to people in the back seat as they do to a spare tire. Well, that's property. Now, these are very normal urges, and a person must not think, for example, that there's something wrong with him simply because he wants to perfect his mind, or because he wants to generate human species, or because he wants to own property. These things are normal. Now, it can happen, of course, that these will not always be controlled by reason or by the law of God. And when these impulses and passions and concupiscences and urges get the better of us, then this natural urge for self-perfection of the mind can become pride, egotism, selfishness. The urge of the body, self-perpetuation of the human species, when not subject to law and right reason, can become what used to be called lust, and sometimes today is called sex, though not properly. And the third urge, if not controlled by reason, could become avarice, selfishness, or worldliness. Now, these, understand, are abnormal, not normal. Now we come to the science of psychiatry. In which is psychiatry interested? The normal or the abnormal? The abnormal. Now there are three psychiatrists who are most important in the science. In other words, they have given the major development to the science, and I am not mentioning them in the order of their importance. The one scientist, or psychiatrist rather, concentrated on only one of these urges, and that was Adler. The second psychiatrist on the flesh, carnality, sex, that was Freud. The third, on security, relationship to the objective world, and that was Jung. These are the pioneers in psychiatry. But before we explain their theories, we must make a distinction. The American minds do not like distinctions, but you cannot think properly without distinctions. Now, the distinction that we make is between a method and a theory. Suppose one were interested in the study of falling bodies, falling human bodies. Well, one way of investigating the study of fallen bodies would be through the camera. One might take pictures of human beings who fall. That would be a method of investigation. Now suppose you began explaining why the men fell. That's entirely different. Here you would be studying motives. Suppose one said, well, the reason this particular man jumped from the bridge was because someone called him a coward, and he wanted to affirm his superiority. That's Adler theory. Suppose another one said, well, no, he was sexually maladjusted. Freud. The other one said he just wanted to show off. He was an extrovert. Jung. These are theories. How do they agree and how do they differ? First of all, they all agree on the method, which is good. The method is psychoanalysis. The major credit for the development of the method of psychoanalysis must be given to Sigmund Freud. Adler and Jung, once associated with him, broke because he was emphasized sex too much. What is psychoanalysis? Psychoanalysis starts with the proposition that in addition to a conscious mind, we also have an unconscious mind. Now, need I tell you, I can't draw. I don't even practice my drawing, as I do not practice these telecasts. Oh, say, did you see? These are little octopuses that people sent me for the angel to erase the blackboard. This is a little boy octopus, and this is a little girl octopus. He's hanging out by his halo, see? Now, this is the first floor of a house. I've got to put the stairs going downstairs. I've got to put it on the outside of the house. But you understand what I mean. Now, this is the stairs that goes down, see? This is the cellar down here. So this is the unconscious mind, and this stands for the conscious mind, the first floor. And this is the cellar door. Now, just as many a housewife, for example, she has rags and bones and hanks of hair that she does not want on the first floor, she opens the cellar door and throws them down. Well, the mind does that too. The human mind often throws down in the unconsciousness many ideas which are unpleasant, which it seeks to repress, which are embarrassing. So they are thrown down into the unconsciousness. And it is rarely that they get upstairs. Why? Because there's a little man here that's called the censor. And whenever some little thought that's down here starts coming up the stairs, this little censor cracks him on the head. So he doesn't get up into consciousness. Well, does he ever get up? Oh, sometimes in dreams, say the psychoanalyst. But then the ideas are disguised. They do not come up as they really are. They come up in another form. You don't know what they mean, but the psychiatrist does. He knows. He'll tell you what they are, not for nothing, but he'll tell you. Now, on this, all of them practically agree. And this method of studying the unconscious mind is valid and right and good and necessary in many circumstances. Now comes the theory. How do you explain the unconscious mind, what is in it, and its relation to the conscious mind? Here you get no agreement. Three schools, Adler, Freud, Jung. Now let's take each of them one by one, although it was Freud who started. Adler. Adler says that there is in everyone a drive for superiority. This drive for superiority is thwarted, some reason or other. It's repressed, driven down into the unconsciousness. And it comes up in a disguised kind of way, what he calls an inferiority complex. So that the basic drive for superiority manifests itself by aggressiveness, by boasting, by loud-mouthedness, selfishness, and 1,000 other forms. In other words, it was Adler who gave us the words that are so often used, inferiority and superiority complex. That's one theory. Theory of Freud is this, that everyone is determined to be what he is, for the most part, during the first 6 years of his existence. During these first 6 years, a child senses a good many pleasures that are associated with certain organs of the body. In this unconsciousness, too, and here I quote Freud verbatim, there is the urge to cannibalism, incest, and murder. Every boy has within himself an urge to kill his own father in order to marry his own mother. That is what is known as an Oedipus complex. Every girl has an urge to kill her own mother and marry her own father. That is an Electra complex. Now, one would like to recover later on in life these pleasures of the first 6 years that are down here in what Freud calls id, id being a Latin word for that, just plain T-H-A-T. But up here in the consciousness, there is what he calls the ego and the superego. There's the taboos, there are the morals, there are conventions of society which repress these infantile urges, the id, which constitutes human nature. Now, there are many Freudians who say, therefore, the way to release many of these complexes is to allow the id an uninhibited outlet. I say there are some Freudians who teach that. That's another theory. The theory of Jung is that in the unconsciousness is not only just this primary sex impulse of Freud, There is not only the personal, but there is also what he calls a kind of a racial unconsciousness. That is to say, the collective unconsciousness of the whole human race. There are myths, symbols, and so forth, by which man is in a kind of a symbolic relationship with his past. Man is constantly trying to get in contact with the world, if he can, and some manifest this contact with the world quite openly, and they become extroverts, and others find themselves at great pain in order to contact the world, and they remain inside of themselves. They are called the introverts. Now, those are the original theories of psychiatry, explained as simply as possible. Note that none of them have explained the whole man. Each has taken a third. Each is 1/3 right, incidentally. But they've not taken the whole man. Furthermore, they are only theories. The Rockefeller Foundation gave money enough to a professor of Harvard to analyze, for example, 116 articles and books, clinical studies, which were supposed to be explained on the Freudian theory alone, and the answer given after this long and expensive investigation was that these clinical cases could just as well be explained by any other theory. Now, it's important to remember that they are theories. The method is solid, the method endures. Now we come to a study, for that's what this is, a study of new developments in psychiatry. What is new? The first development is, and it breaks to some extent with the psychoanalytic approach, the recognition that man is a psychosomatic unit. Psycho, he has a mind; somatic, he has a body. And the two are related one to the other. It has been proven by research, and I was recently talking to one of the doctors who is doing research along these particular lines. She is interested in the chemistry of the cell and metabolism. The scientist says that it is possible to notice the chemical changes in a cell where there is great fatigue. When the chemistry of the cell changes, it affects the glands, it affects the brain. Therefore, according to the newer developments, there is often, not always, there is often a physiological basis for psychoses and neuroses. In other words, the reaction now is against a kind of an angelism which regards the subconscious mind as something floating around in space. No, it's related to a body, it's related to an organism, and the body has effect on the mind, and the mind has an effect upon the body. Then to the new drugs, the Rowulfia drugs, the chlorpromazine drugs, all of these that were used first of all in treating heart trouble and also high blood pressure, now are found to have some effect not only in quieting, but in many instances of curing people who are suffering from mental diseases, with the result that thanks to these new drugs, there are 17,000 less patients in mental hospitals now than there were at this time last year. Mental patients are not staying as long as they did before. In other words, in many instances, there is a physiological, biological, metabolical foundation for mental diseases. And where the basis is chemical, psychoanalytic method will not do. That's one change. Another. And here, we're going to discuss principally those who still hold to the psychoanalytic method. There are a group of new psychiatrists which have left all of these passé. So when you go to a psychiatrist, be up to date. Get your money's worth. The newer development in psychiatry recognizes that man is not only a unit of body and soul, but he's also a unit. They're getting back again, you see, to the fact that there is not only an unconscious mind, but there is also a conscious mind. And psychotherapy must now begin to take account of the two. Some of these leading psychiatrists from all over the world, Bonaventura, who was killed in Jerusalem, great loss indeed for the field of psychiatry. Igor Caruso, Binswanger, Stalker, Carr, Holland, greatest of them all, Wilfred Dane, Rohrbacher, Lersch, and others. And what's the position of these psychiatrists? The position of these psychiatrists is, as one of them has put it, Bonaventura, there is something specifically human in man, namely his urge toward morality, that sometimes his unconscious mind can be controlled. Sometimes there may be a sense of guilt, and the psychiatrist must take account of it. But on the whole, all of these psychiatrists are now getting back to the fact that man, and this practically all of them agree, man has an intellect and a will. He has reason. He has the power of choice. In other words, he's a responsible being. And they're trying to give, as Carper said, some significance to life. And the meaning that they attach to existence and the problem of values has a tremendous effect upon them. And these psychiatrists are saying that it's not enough merely to analyze, for example, to find the dead acorn from which the oak came. You do not explain the oak by that rotted acorn. When a ship is sinking, it is not merely enough to analyze the waters that pour into the hold of the vessel. We cannot explain, for example, the statue of David by Michelangelo by saying that the marble was 6 million years in the bowels of the earth. You explain it also by something else. Namely, you explain it by the intellect, and the artistic skill, and the resolution of Michelangelo. So too psychiatrists now, even though they use the psychoanalytic method as Dane does, they're now getting back to the fact that man is not an animal, that he's rational. In other words, there's now not just a psychoanalysis, but there's also a psychosynthesis. And psychiatry, therefore, is making great strides physically with these drugs that I mentioned. And now, we might almost say,
said you can also hang coats and hats on these. Being of a very sweet disposition, the angel is put in charge of these flowers that you see. He was a little slow in getting them out today. The floor manager said to him, "Better put those flowers out or I'll spank you." The angel says, "That's a big joke. An angel doesn't have any place to spank." Well, this is a telecast on hope. And the reason we've chosen this subject is because there seems to be so much despair in the world. And we will take as despairing a look as one can and then extract hope. You remember the old legend of Pandora's box? Pandora opened a box, and death, disease, destruction, economic chaos, leprosy, fears all came out, and she barely slammed the lid on the box. Otherwise, hope would have got out. Hope was the only thing that was left in the box to indicate that there's some hope even amidst all the evils of the world. G.F. Watts did a painting of hope. And in it, he pictured a beautiful lady, but blindfolded, seated on a solitary planet whirling around into space. And she had before a harp. But the harp had only one string. And she was drawing a melody out of that one string. That is hope. Now, because we're going to show the real basis of hope, let us picture what the world thinks of despair, and we're going to give the three wounds and origins of modern despair. And I will perhaps leave these on the board and then come back to them every now and then. In other words, what makes modern despair? Well, first thing is God is dead. In other words, we have nothing left in this world except the world itself. If there's any hope, it's technology and science. Maybe if we just give enough time, technology may be able to take care of all of our diseases. There'll be no more poverty. But there's no such thing as guilt or sin. We have only to deal with social issues. This is one of the despairing pictures of the modern world. And the second is violence, which disturbs us all. Now, out of all of the many facets of violence that we could choose, we're just going to choose one phase of violence, and that will be modern wars. Now, what is terrible about modern wars is that they involve less and less the soldiers who fight. They touch more and more the civilians. And let me run down a picture. In World War I, there were 10 million killed. Out of that 10 million, the amount of civilians was only 5%, which was indeed small. In World War II, there were 50 million killed. And the number of civilians was 48%, non-combatants. The Korean War, there were 9 million killed, and the amount of civilians, 84%. We could go on to robberies, muggings, murders, and so forth. But this shows that civilians and non-combatants are less and less immune from violence and destruction. A third basis of insecurity, of rather despair in our modern world, is what might be called the despair that comes from the secular city. the anxiety of modern man in contemporary civilization, his fears, his dreads, his neuroses, his psychoses, his loneliness. He's a wanderer on the earth. And you add up these three. Of a world in which science is the only hope and there is no guilt, violence and secularism, you have the despair in which we're all involved. Now, there have been myths in history which rather typify these three, and I'm going now to go to myths. We make perhaps too much fun of myths, but they, under the guise of a story or a legend or a novel that depicts the mind of history, there is hidden a great truth. One myth we go to, which belongs in this category here, is the myth of Faust. In this story of Faust the devil, he starts translating the Gospel of John. The beginning of the Gospel of John is, in the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was purpose, goal, meaning, destiny, intelligence. And the devil translated, in the beginning was the, and he could not write word. That was too much for him. He couldn't give intelligence to anybody but himself. And so Faust wrote, in the beginning was the deed. In the beginning is the act. In the beginning is the situation. In the beginning is the thing that you do, which is without any moral determinant. That's merely the old way of picturing this notion. Now we come to another myth. The myth of Prometheus. Prometheus stole fire from heaven. And when he brought fire down to this earth, he brought with it violence and destructiveness, not warmth and not love. And this old ancient Greek myth is passed on through all of the ages. And then we come to a third myth, Circe. Circe had a magic wand. And the magic wand was stolen, and anyone that it touched turned into a pig, for Circe had that power. In other words, evil is lonely when it's left by itself. It has to have company. It's got to form a city, corporation, a group. Circe was the basis of all evil communications, whatever they be. Press, radio, television, pornography, anything. That which is wicked and base wants to make everyone else base, otherwise it's not content and happy. So you see, there's nothing new. Despair is only happening to new people. Now we're going to use one other example, and that will be the burden of this telecast. We're going to use the example of Cain, the Cain who killed Abel. And that's the beginning of all of these legends and of the despair of the contemporary civilization. First, Cain was the one who said, practically, God is dead. Why? He refused to acknowledge guilt. No guilt, we said. No judge. And that was one of the reasons why Cain would offer no bloody sacrifice. He offered what? He offered nature. He offered technology. He offered the earth. He would not admit that he was responsible to anyone else. There was foulness on his soul that had to be washed away. It was only the manipulation of things, that was all. That's the reason the sacrifice was not pleasing. Secondly, violence. He was the man with a club. Just as soon as God is dead, neighbor's dead. It follows. And so the day that Cain raised that forked club over the head of Abel and let it fall upon him, it turned into a gun, turned into hydrogen, turned into nitrogen, turned into intercontinental missiles. And the violence has continued from that club of Cain up to the present time. There was a German writer by the name of Brochert who wrote a story about Cain without mentioning Abel, for after all, we all belong to the race of Cain. And he said, when he was 2, at the age of 2, 2 men fought with fists. At the age of 12, they fought with clubs. At the age of 22, they fought with guns. At the age of 42, they were both infected with disease. And at the age of 62, they died and were buried together. And finally, when Cain had killed his brother, he said, I'll be a wanderer on the earth. He was frightened and afraid. And when God said to him, where's your brother Abel? He said, wherever I go, men will kill me. He was afraid of vengeance. And so he founded the first city. Interesting, isn't it? What he dreaded was some kind of wrath that might be upon him. Now it's strange, isn't it, that in a talk on hope I should picture despair in such a triple way? Why? Oh, because we don't want hope to be just a kind of an optimism, a blinking of ourselves to the great realities of life. We're going to take the worst, when evil is most potent, and show how there's hope. And who will show us? Cain. So let's go back to Cain. That's going to give the angel a big job to get rid of all of that violence and despair. He loves to get rid of despair. Just watch him work on that board. But listen to what I'm saying, too. You in the television audience won't see him, but I can only tell you that he doesn't like hopelessness. Now we come to hope and Cain. When Cain had killed his brother, he said to God, wherever I go, men will seek to kill me. See, there were other men besides Cain on earth. And he became a wanderer upon the earth. Anxiety, restlessness in this secular city. He went off to the land of Nod. The word Nod is from the Hebrew word Nod, which means wanderer, that's all. He became restless like modern man. And when he said to God, I'm afraid, what did God say? He said, I will set a mark upon you, that no one may take vengeance upon you. What was that mark? Was it for any of the successors of Cain? Not very likely. What was the mark itself? I don't know, it might have been the blood that was on his hands, Abel's blood that he couldn't wash off. Could have been that. Blood like that which stained the hands of Lady Macbeth, who said, will not all the waters of the seven seas wash this blood incarnadine from my hands? But at any rate, he was given a sign. You see, the sign was not vengeance, it was to protect him from vengeance. God was giving him a sign like that rainbow in the sky after the flood. A covenant of mercy. In other words, Cain, you'll not be revenged. Vengeance belongs to me, not to men. So he surrounded him with what? Surrounded him with mercy. Very much like, for example, the judges in the Middle Ages, whenever they sentenced anyone to death, had to receive communion with that man the day of his death in order to remind them, the condemned man, that after all, though I'm executing justice, you belong to a greater realm of mercy and understanding and compassion. And so what God did was surround him with compassion, with mercy. And that mark was a sign, you're God's property. You don't belong to men so that they can kill you. You're mine. And the Arabic word Gainel means slave of God, which is probably a word that was taken from this very mark of Cain. Now let's modernize Cain and the murder of Abel. And let us go to a modern Cain and a modern Abel. To the assassination of Martin Luther King. He's slain by another. There's a trial. In the course of the trial, evidence is adduced against Cain, the assassin. Prosecuting attorney points out that exactly the same fingerprints that are found on a gun were found on objects which he left in a room. Witnesses come forward to attest that they saw the modern Cain fly from the scene of the crime. Other corroborating evidence is brought forward, and there's no doubt whatever in the mind of the judge that Abel was slain by Cain or Martin Luther King by an assassin. But during the trial, there are rumors, just rumors. One rumor was that Martin Luther King appeared in Memphis. Another, that he was seen walking in the city of Atlanta. And another, that he was with the poor in Washington. There were only rumors. Nobody believed them. The press would not even print the rumors. And just at the moment that the judge sentences Martin Luther King, sentences the assassin of Martin Luther King, Cain, to death, Martin Luther King walks into the courtroom. Cain would say, "Where's the corpus delicti? How can you dare say that I have killed a man when this man stands before you alive?" I am not a murderer. Martin Luther King says, yes, I am alive. The judge says there's nothing left for me to do but to release you, Cain. For he who was dead is alive. And there was another Cain, a race of Cains, you and I, and we slew another Abel, the just Abel. And he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And rumors began to fly about that he was seen in several places, that he actually was not dead, that he was alive. And he's seen walking on the wings of the morning. And if the modern Cain cannot be guilty of slaying the modern Abel, if that Abel is alive, then is not the hope of all of the modern Cains. In this mark that was put upon him by a merciful God, is not their salvation in the fact that they too are saved by the just Abel,